Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flottum.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey, we want to thank Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. While you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping Your First 3 Years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a new quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinator insects, both wild and managed, before they disappear. The magazine is full of beautiful photos and informative articles. Learn more in our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor Kirsten Trainer, who is also now joining us as an occasional guest co-host, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. Hey everybody, we want to welcome you to this special Bee World Day tribute in remembrance of Ann Harman. Ann Harman was a longtime contributor to Bee Culture magazine and a longtime worker for bees and very involved actively in national and regional organizations. With us today, we have Kim Flottum, a co-host and friend, and Kathy Summers from Bee Culture, and Dewey Caron from also longtime East Coast EAS and knew Ann very well. So, Dewey, why don't you lead it off with us today?
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome to World Bee Day. We are dedicating today for this tribute to Ann Harman. Ann Harman was 89. She passed away peacefully at home with her daughter and sons around her after a short illness. She had broken a hip last year when one of her horses pinned her against a stall. Had gone through a lot of the rehab, et cetera, and then unfortunately broke the other hip. Went in the hospital, and then there was a cascade of events. So she asked to be brought home so that she could pass her last few days at peace at home with her animals and with her family. Ann grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. She got a chemistry major from Virginia Tech, and then worked for many of the not many, but a couple of the ABC agencies in the D.C. area as a lab tech, as a chemistry lab tech. She went to England near Reading to when her husband was stationed over there, and when she came back, she elected not to stay with the lab tech position. Eventually got a position teaching at Georgetown Day School. And that's where I met her. I was at the University of Maryland as a new professor at that point, and we were giving courses in the spring, like many places do, the typical beginner's new course. We had a crowd, and this one person came up afterwards and said, gee, I've got some land out in suburban DC, and I'd like to get started with bees. And so we chatted just a little bit. I took a number down. And 3 days later, I got a swarm call for a swarm, rather distant for me, but over near where she was in northwest DC, Georgetown area. And so I called her up. I said, can you get out of class? We got a swarm. And sure enough, we did. And she was so enthusiastic. Rather than bringing the swarm back to the university, I said, here, why don't you take this? She said, what am I going? Yeah. Well, she did. She did take it. That one colony eventually grew to something like 50 colonies in her suburban Maryland property. she showed up again and said, "Do you need help?" And at the university, we always need help. And I said, "I've got a lot more colonies this year because of an experiment I was doing." And she just said, "Well, can I help manage them?" They were out beyond her. University had a property out beyond the suburban area. And so she took over managing those colonies. And that year, we couldn't keep enough supers on those colonies. She did something right. Very, very enthusiastic. And from that, our friendship grew through the years. She had an interest with animals, had animals on her farm, and made a connection through one of the agencies she was working with some veterinarians that were working on arthritic conditions of caged animals, particularly beagle dogs and horses. And with her interest, I think she volunteered. I'm not sure how this happened, but she got involved with that particular project. They were looking at the effects of bee venom therapy for these animals, for the movement of the animals themselves, confined within the cages. That turned into a bunch of different things, but one of the things it turned into is her and the veterinarians, myself, and some other interested people founding the first of what were apitherapy societies in North America. That initial founding was basically bee venom therapy for animals. It has now been reestablished as the AAS, American Apitherapy Society, by MDs, and so it has melded into a society now more directed towards bee venom therapy for humans. But Ann and her interest helped start that whole effort. I was involved at the time with EAS, Eastern Apicultural Society, had started at the University of Maryland in 1955. At my urging, she volunteered to be on the program for the 1980 EAS that was then held at the University of Vermont. And I said, "Well, I'll take you up there. We'll support your trip, et cetera, if you'd like to try to make this presentation about this bee venom work." Well, she did, and really the rest is history as far as EAS. She did everything in EAS that you can possibly imagine. She was on the program the next year, 1981, when EAS was at Rutgers, and that was the year that we moved what we call the EAS Master Beekeeper program from its beginnings at Cornell University, where we had initially developed the program modeled after a program that is done in England. And myself, Roger Morris, and some others gave that initial training. But Roger Morris recognized that this needed to get beyond New York State and moved it then to EAS. So the first program was offered in 1981, and Ann was one of about 54, 55 individuals that took the testing, and one of only 10 that passed the EAS Master Beekeeper program. She came back years and years and years from that point to help train new master beekeepers. We were offering a short course before the EAS meeting. She would teach in that. Then she would be involved in the actual testing, developing of the test, developing of the questions. When I came back to EAS in 2016 and needed to develop the test for the EAS Master Beekeeper program after our longtime advisor, Clarence Collison, had retired, I casually asked, "Gee, Ann, back in when we started in 81, 82, I'd like to see, do you any chance have those tests? I'd like to see what kind of questions we asked when we started this thing." And 2 days later, she was back with the test for the first 2 years for her EAS, the 81 and the 82 test, copies of them. it's amazing you could ever find anything in her files, but she knew where everything was in her file, in her file system. In her house, every room you walked into was a virtual bee filing system of back issues of journals, of books, of material that had been written, etc. She eventually went to the computer and could find things a little bit easier on the computer. EAS, she continued with her interest getting up to 50 colonies. She took a very strong interest in honey. What was honey? How could you tell the different honeys? What is this whole thing about, the terroir of honey, of how you can even identify honeys to local locations as you can, like coffee and wines. This led to her suggesting one day, casually, we're running around doing all these honey shows. One of my responsibilities was to judge honey shows throughout the Maryland counties. And she said, let's train some others. I said, boy, that's a great idea. Getting tired of all this travel to all these counties to judge a honey show. And so it led to her finding a chemist, another of her buddies in the DC area. And the three of us put on the first of a honey tasting, honey judging workshop at the university. And so this was in the mid to late 1970s. She went on to be a world-class judge. She was one of the first in the U.S. to be certified with judging by what is called the Welsh Honey Judge system, a 2-year program that does indeed rigorously train individuals first to steward and then to judge honey shows. And herself went around the world judging honey. She took an interest in Apimondia because they have a very large show. She went to the American Beekeeping Federation and was our chairman for EAS and judge of the EAS honey show that has become quite a extensive, very large honey show as well. Plus honey shows throughout the region from Maine to Florida, west to the Mississippi and even beyond. Her last honey show judging, I believe, would have been November of last year, 2019, when she judged again the Texas honey show. In September, she was in Montreal as one of the judges for the Apimondia show that was there in Montreal. The farthest she went to judge was the honey show that was in Korea when Apimondia was in Korea. And let me finish with, this is World Bee Day. World Bee Day was recognized by the United Nations just 2-3 years ago. The first celebration was 2018. It was approved in December of 2017 by the United Nations. And the group that was leading that were a group of beekeepers from Slovenia. Slovenia is one of the Eastern European countries that probably has the highest number per capita of beekeepers of their population. Estimated that 1 in every 200 individuals keeps bees in that country. Well, the Slovenian beekeepers were the ones that came forward to the United Nations with a proposal that we have a World Bee Day. Part of this grew out of their hosting Apimondia in 2003. Ann, I believe, went to that meeting in Slovenia. And it was for Ann one of 54 world travels on behalf of NGOs such as Partners of the Americas and Land of Lakes and their international program. A number of these NGOs, ACDI, VOCA, our ABC agencies, the Citizens Network for Foreign Affairs. So she was a volunteer for 54 of these assignments, 29 countries on all continents. And one of the countries she had visited was Slovenia. So on World Bee Day, we appreciate the effort that the Slovenian beekeepers did to bring this recognition for bees to the United Nations to get it approved. And we would like to pay tribute to Ann for all that she has done on behalf of us and as beekeepers. Now, that's only touching the surface. Cam, I'll throw it back to you. I know you've had a long association with Ann as well in your role as, you've had so many different roles, but most recently as editor of Bee Culture. So I'll throw it back to you.
Well, thanks, Dewey. That's quite a story that you have to tell. I met Ann when I was living in Connecticut in 1985. And in Connecticut, the president of the State Beekeepers Association, which I'd been elected to, was also the director for EAS. So in the fall of '85, I went to my first directors meeting, and there was a flurry of action there where the chairman stepped down, and then at the time they had one person being secretary treasurer, and she stepped down, and suddenly EAS was leaderless. And my first meeting, I didn't know anybody there, so I kind of watched. Was fairly amazed. By the end of the night, we get out of there, I don't know, it was 12:30, 1 o'clock. But by the end of the night, they'd chosen a new chairman. They chose Bob Cole, and we were heading back we were staying at the dorms at the time. So I'm walking back to the dorm, and there's this little tiny lady walking in front of me. And I'd seen her in the meeting, and she hadn't had a lot to say during the discussion, but some things. And so I kind of caught up to her, and I said, you guys really know how to have meetings. And she looked at me and she said, it takes that group of people a whole day to decide what time it is. I'm amazed that they got this decision tonight. Ann did not suffer fools gladly, and was quick to tell you when you made a mistake, but she did it with a smile, and she had radiant smile. Oh. After that, I moved to Medina. I came to Medina here as editor, and at right about that time, she and Ernie Miner wrote a Cooking with Honey cookbook, and she had been writing for the magazine off and on anyway, and so we put our heads together, and she started with a regular column called Home Harmony. I thought it was cute. She thought it was too cute, but she stuck with it, and that was 34 years ago. And I don't think she's ever missed a month with all the travels that she did. She'd have an article in 3 months early because she knew she was going to be out of country. And not only was she on time, she was early every month. And I know Kathy's got some things to say about that, but from an editor's perspective, she'd come to me and she'd say, "What do you need this month?" She wrote about honey for a while, but then and then she went back to it every season, Christmas and Easter and things, she'd have recipes. But in between, she came back and she wrote about bees and beekeeping and beekeepers and bee meetings and bee people. And she'd come to me and she said, "What do you need for August?" She'd do this in January. "What do you need for August?" And I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, I'm worrying about the February issue, and she wants to know what I want for August. So she kept me on my toes, and I'd give her a subject, and the beginning of June, I'd have an August article on the topic that we'd picked. And the nice thing about Ann was she didn't need editing. It came in and went right to Kathy, who fixed it up for the magazine. I read it, but I never picked up the red pencil. She was that good. When I moved along as chairman or as editor, I, like you, joined EAS, and as a director from Ohio, eventually was elected chairman. And when you were chairman, Dewey, you had decided that there was more here than you wanted to handle or could handle, and you needed a vice chairman. So you created the position, and you picked the perfect person. You picked Ann to be your vice chairman because she'd been there longer than you had. and knew everybody and everything, and knew who to go to get things done. When I was elected chairman, there wasn't a moment's hesitation. This is the person I need. I mean, who better to have a second in charge who knows the job better than the guy who is in charge? So we picked her as vice chairman. She stayed there for 8 years with me, and then I moved on, and she stayed with EAS, but not as vice chair. And then the nice thing about it was she got her last article in on time, early. And when she came home from the hospital, she dictated her very last article to her daughter, Joyce, who passed it along to us. So we have a couple of more pieces by her coming on down the road, but I'm not sure what bee culture is going to do without that contribution every month. I'm almost glad I'm not in a position to have to figure it out, but she was a big part of the magazine, a big part of EAS, and a big part of my life. We'll miss her.
She wrote on an immense variety of topics. That was what was so amazing. You'd say you'd come up with some sort of a topic, and she turned it into a 2-pager in seemingly overnight. But as you say, she did her work. It was well documented. It wasn't off the cuff. A very careful writer. I used her as my proofreader for the honeybee biology and beekeeping and biology. She was very, very careful proofreader.
She was also one of the editors for 2 issues of ABC and XYZ.
That's great.
And she did the index for one of them. I mean, the 3 of us here could just go, spend the next hour listing her skills.
Yeah.
Kath, you knew her. When did you get to know her?
I met Ann in 1994 at my very first EAS. And I had known of her because I'd been doing the layout on the magazine. So like you said, every month the article showed up, but I met her in person that year. And that year is when I met everybody in person. I met Dewey and Roger Morris and Richard Taylor. I mean, I just walked around all that week, I think, with my mouth hanging open. Jim too. And, I'd known about all these people because I had dealt with them every month, but that was the year I finally got to meet everybody. So that was exciting for me. I was slightly intimidated by Ann when I first got to know her. She was just so powerful, I guess, is the word I would use. And being a woman, and especially at that time, still mostly male-dominated industry. It's getting better. There's getting to be more of us women, but that never seemed to enter her mind. She was never intimidated by anybody. She never let anybody slow her down or challenge her too much. And across the years, I really learned from her. And at some point, and I couldn't give you a date or a time, but at some point, I realized that I had earned her respect and that we had become friends. We had become very good friends. And Ann and I got to be very close. And we would see her maybe 3 times a year. We'd usually see her at the Federation. And of course, we'd see her at EAS. And then once in a while, we'd bump into her somewhere, some other state meeting that we'd gone to, or maybe HAS or something like that. So we didn't spend a lot of time together physically over the years, but there was that constant communication between us. And one thing that always struck with me, she met my 2 boys at an EAS at Seven Springs when they were middle school. And she always asked about them. She always talked about my children and was always concerned about them and what was going on in our lives. And I guess if I tried to think last night as I was thinking about this, what I would want people to know or remember about Ann, she was, as Kim said, she was tiny in stature, but that was the only tiny thing about her. Everything else in her life was big. She had big dogs and big cats and big horses and big ideas. And she just she just charged ahead. She would do anything that Kim asked her to do, whatever topic, whatever task. We worked a lot together, her and I, on EAS, because after she was vice chairman, then I followed in her footsteps and was the next vice chairman. And so we spent a lot of time just organizing and me being able to ask for her guidance and ask her questions. And even, I guess, I kind of thought she'd always be there. She just might live forever because she was so strong. There were several times over the years, way back, maybe 15 years or more, she fell off her tractor. Do you remember that, Dewey? And was banged up. You know, we got this phone call from Joyce saying, okay, Mom's in the hospital. And you think, wow, you know, that's really bad. Is she going to make it? Well, yeah, she made it. Here she came. And then a few years ago, again, she fell off the horse. And, you know, every so often we'd get these phone calls of things that would take most of us out. We'd just be done. That'd be it, you know. But here she came back again. She always came back. And so this time I thought she'd come back too. But it was just more than she wanted to deal with. And right up until the very end, she still communicated with us through Joyce. And that was really comforting and really, to me, still showed her stamina and her personality. We sent emails, and through Joyce, she would respond. So that was very comforting. And I will miss her a lot. I do miss her a lot already. So thanks for doing this. This is a nice way to honor her.
Yeah, right up until the end, she was, like I said, not only communicating, but she got her article in early. An amazing lady.
Yeah, and so fitting to honor her on World Bee Day, that being one of the countries that she visited, and Apimondia being so dear to her heart, as well as the Federation, as well as EAS, etc. She was quite a person. Kathy was saying that she kept coming back in November when she broke her hip initially, when the horse pressed her initially. I mean, that's pretty serious for a person that she was 88 at the time. And she came back. She did all that therapy that you have to do to relearn to walk, etc. She was a fighter. She tiny in stature, but so large in life, and quite a person for us in our bee world.
Well, Kim, anything else
I think
you want to add?
I think we got three perspectives here on Ann that different but similar. She touched all of us, and I don't think we'll ever forget her. So we'll just leave it at that.
She touched everyone that she met. Well, thank you, Kathy, Dewey, Kim, for sharing your memories of Ann. She obviously was very, very important to the bee world, and she will be sorely missed. That about wraps up for this special World Bee Day tribute to Ann Harman and this episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. As always, we want to thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their sponsorship of Beekeeping Today podcast. And we want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else we want to say in the final moments?
Well, I think Dewey said it. Happy Bee Day, and go out, enjoy the sun, and pet a bee.
Very good. All right. Thank you.